In late 2019, I visited Bolivia. The trip was beyond my wildest imaginations. I climbed mountains, trekked valleys, met interesting people, and I encountered animals I've never seen before. Here's a documentary of what I saw and experienced. Having heard that a friend of mine was already in South America, I decided to meet up with him. So I packed my bags, and after a few layovers, I arrived in Bolivia. I started in Sucre, a city of 300,000 people, situated in the south-central part of the country. The first thing I noticed about Sucre was its altitude. At 2,800 meters above sea level, I often felt a shortness of breath after a brief physical exertion, such as climbing up some stairs. After a 45-minute taxi ride from the airport, I arrived at the city and met up with my friend. Known as La Ciudad Blanca, or the White City, Sucre is famous for its many colonial-style buildings painted in white. Its history dates back to the 1500s, with most of the street grid in the center of the city remaining unchanged. We found many statues around, signifying that long history. Later, we made our way to the University of St. Francis Xavier, one of the oldest universities in the New World. Look, I found the university building on the 100 Boliviano note. After a 20-minute walk towards the southern eastern end of the city, we reached the Recoleta lookout. The sun was beating down on us, so we stopped for some juice. At night, we met up with some fellow travelers and had a blast dancing at the Cultural Berlin, a German-themed nightclub and hostel. One thing I'll miss is the chicken and potatoes meal served everywhere. We had some of those after our outings. The next day, we visited Palacete de Guero, a historical mansion on the edge of town. It is now a government building open to the public. We first went up the clock tower on the top, climbing up and down the shaky wooden stairs. Afterwards, our guide took us to an escape tunnel in the garden grounds. It was constructed during the war times, meant for the owners of the mansion to escape emergencies. The tunnel was hot and humid, and way too low for us to stand up, so we crouched down and scooted forward. The exit on the other side of the tunnel was closed, so we had to turn back the same way. Despite the discomfort, it was still a very interesting experience. After the tunnel, we went to a nearby pub and shared a cup of chicha. We also played a game of Toad in the Hole, except it was called Juego del Sapo. One thing that caught my eye was the presence of street crossing mascots that help pedestrians get through busy intersections. If my travels have taught me anything, it was that when I see mountains of fresh fruits, I should get a juice, just as the locals. Despite the hustle and bustle in the markets and on the streets, Sucre had a relaxed charm that I can't really describe. We took a day trip to Terribuco, a small town about 65 kilometers southeast of Sucre. We heard that on Sundays, the town hosts an open-air market. After arriving, we were surprised and delighted to find a special festivity happening. A parade of people dressed in furry and elaborate costumes marched in the town center. We found that this was called Diablada, a theatrical ceremony and religious presentation. The parade ended up in the town arena. We followed the crowd up an adjacent hill. From this vantage point, we could see that a bullfight was taking place. But don't worry, no animals were hurt during this performance. What did happen was that a young man, filled with bravado, ran amok in the bull ring. Locals watched intently. As the day got late, we managed to squeeze onto a packed bus back to Sucre. After some beers and sharing a dinner of quinoa lasagna with friends we've made in Sucre, we ended up in a rock concert by a local favorite band. Later, we set off for Tupiza by bus. a city that is 400 kilometers south of Sucre. But next morning, we've arrived in Tupiza to begin our expedition to Uyuni. This was our driver and guide, and this was our SUV. We were joined by a couple and a tour cook who would be making food for us on the journey. Breathtaking is a good word to describe the views, but it's also appropriate for the high altitude. Feeling the effects, I began chewing coca leaves like the locals. Our driver spotted the first herd of llamas. We got up close and personal with them, but they weren't afraid of us. These are majestic creatures without a care in the world. Soon after leaving the city, my phone signal disappeared. It would not come back for the next 4 days, when I returned from the wilderness. As we climbed higher and higher, snowflakes began appearing. We reached an old, abandoned mining village. It's hard to imagine that only a few decades ago, this town was filled with people. Now it's simply called Pueblo Fantasma, which literally means ghost town. At around 5,000 meters above sea level, I definitely felt the effects. Before sundown, we arrived at our accommodation for the night, a small village called Quintana Chico. After waking up the next morning, we had a cup of coca tea and played fetch with the street dog. But now we got some roosters. See what the dog does. Oh, the roosters are more interesting. Oh, maybe not. Maybe not for now. As we drove past these small communities in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't help but to feel a sense of amazement. First, I was amazed by the lack of water, plants, and things that we deemed necessary for human settlement. But I was also amazed by people's ability to make something out of nothing. And just like that, our vehicle broke down. Our driver wasn't fazed, however. Luckily, we weren't stuck in the middle of nowhere, because there was a nearby llama farm. The dogs came out to greet us.
They're all looking
At us.
Yeah.
We're clearly the intruders here.
Yeah.
Despite their fluffy exterior, llamas are tough animals adapted to living in harsh conditions. They've got a personality too. Calm, curious, gentle, and sometimes mischievous. They've been part of local cultures for thousands of years. Before this, I've never really traveled to a place where not only there are no people around, there are also no trees and plants around. Rocks, mountains, salt lakes were all that we saw. Occasionally, a few vicuñas and flamingos would be spotted. After some more off-road driving, we arrived at Sol de Mañana, or Morning Sun, a large, seismically active area close to the border of Chile. Steam came out of the wells on the ground, and sulfuric mud boiled around us, combined with the landscape, made it very surreal. When we arrived at our next accommodation, it was still in the afternoon. So after topping off the fuel, which was carried on top of the vehicle, we went to Laguna Colorada, which means Red Lake. A curious llama baby came by to say hi to us. The llamas started to get up and head for home. We were lucky enough to catch a few of them still hanging out in the remaining sunshine. Before nightfall, we went back to our lodging and tried to stay warm as the temperature dropped below freezing. The next morning, a curious llama walked into our compound to check out what the dogs were up to. This time, we drove to the north side of Laguna Colorada. We dared not to make any noises. I wasn't sure what they were eating, but what I was sure of was that this was as close as we can get to Wonderland on Earth. Soon we arrived at Rock Tree, a sandstone formation carved by strong winds. I noticed that my hand dried and cracked because I didn't dry them properly after washing them in cold water last night. After a brief stop at Laguna Honda, we went to Laguna Hedionda, where thousands of flamingos rested and feasted. We got off the SUV and began walking towards our lunch spot along the shoreline. The tranquility was magical. I was completely mesmerized. Time seemed to stand still. Lost at the wonder before our eyes. Did you know that flamingos get their color from the pigment in their diet? Perched up above the lake, we enjoyed lunch with a view. Next, we went to a viewpoint where we could get a glimpse of the Oyage, an active volcano with smoke coming out of its lava dome at the top. The desert before us became Salar de Chiquana, a smaller salt plain just south of the Uyuni. We reached an abandoned railway that was used to carry minerals to the coast. After stopping for a quinoa beer, we arrived at our stay for the night, a hotel on the edge of Uyuni salt flat, made entirely of salt. The walls were made of salt, the ground was made of salt. I pinched a few grains off the wall and tasted them. It was salt, alright. I was delighted because it would be the first hot shower I had in 3 days. At 5 a.m. next morning, we set out in the dark. Our goal was to reach the perfect location to catch the sunrise. After about an hour of driving, we made it there. The light on the horizon rose up slowly. We stood in awe. Feeling the sun ray warming everything around us. I wonder if our love for sunrise is perhaps because of a fundamental human desire to start afresh. It's nature's ode to new beginnings. We hopped over to Isla Incahuasi, a cactus island where we got an elevated view of the salt flat. Vehicles' tires drew black lines on the white ground. Standing in the middle of the salt flat is a surreal experience. One thing people do at Uyuni is to take perspective photos. We jumped on that bandwagon as well. Our tour guide shot a little music video of our group dancing out of a chip can. Then we played a game where we walked towards our guide with our eyes closed and ears covered. It was harder than it looked. Plaza de las Banderas collected flags from all over the world. We tried to name a few.
Oh, there's got a Japanese flag here. With the north is all official Canadian. We have the Swedish. This is Croatia, I think. This is Nepal, right? No?
The last stop on our tour was at the train cemetery of Uyuni, where we did some more climbing.
We're standing on top of the trains.
With our days in Bolivia nearing to an end, we headed for La Paz by plane. As the administrative capital of Bolivia, La Paz is one of its most populous cities. We got a glimpse of that density at Mirador Kilikili, a viewpoint on the high grounds. Hopping onto the modern aerial lift called Teleferico gave us a more dynamic view. Costing only 3 Bolivianos, or 44 cents in US dollars, it is an affordable and fast way of getting around the city. We noticed a bunch of colorful houses resting below a steep cliff. So we got off the lift to investigate. The views from this neighborhood were incredible. One thing that we must do is go mountain biking on the Yungas Road northeast of La Paz. Due to the dangerous nature of the road, we asked for safety from Pachamama,
Keep me safe.
or Mother Earth, a goddess revered by the indigenous people. With the ceremony done, we set out on the fast downhill stretch of the highway. Reaching speeds of 40 kilometers an hour, we arrived at the beginning of the off-pavement section. It is called Death Road for good reason. Narrow, bumpy, and slippery. Death from falling off the edge used to be a common thing in the past. We noticed a few crosses marking accidents in recent years. The views were incredible, but the dangers were just as real. Can you believe that large trucks used to pass through this road every day before the new highway was built? As we biked down from the top of the mountain, the climate became warm and then hot. We passed streams and waterfalls. The next day back in La Paz, we checked out Basilica de San Francisco, a unique church with a narrow stairway inside. Our restful day concluded with us busing over to Copacabana, a town on the shores of Lake Titicaca. Having gone through a few thrilling adventures in the last week, we decided to relax and enjoy what the lake had to offer. Thank you, Bolivia. You have been amazing.